At this point in the hero's journey, the hero is no longer teetering on the edge of adventure. They've crossed the line. The door to the old world has closed, and the only way out is forward. This is where the stakes rise, the pressure builds, and the weight of the story begins to fall on the hero's shoulders. These next three stages, crossing the threshold, tests allies and enemies, are where we separate dreamers from doers. It's the space where the journey truly begins, and if done well, this part of the story grips the audience and doesn't let go. Let's break it down. Stage 4, crossing the first threshold. This is the moment when the hero takes the first irreversible step into the unknown. There's no going back. It's Luke Skywalker leaving Tatooine, Dorothy landing in Oz, or Neo waking up in the real world after taking the red pill. There is often a threshold guardian at this stage, someone or something that tries to block the hero from moving forward. But here's what makes the moment so significant. The world itself changes. The familiar rules of the ordinary world no longer apply. This is important as you do your writing. The hero has to learn new rules of this new reality. Think of Harry Potter walking to Diagon Alley for the first time. The shift is so dramatic that the world itself feels enchanted, surreal, and often hostile. In Stephen King's The Drawing of the Three, Roland faces this moment after waking up on the beach, barely alive, after a monster mauls his hand. He's physically broken, he's hungry, he's feverish. The world he's now in is harsh and unfamiliar, but he doesn't have the option to turn back. His survival depends on moving forward, and to do that, he has to come through a literal portal to an entirely different world. That's as threshold as it gets. Notice how King's version of the threshold crossing isn't flashy. It's not a magical portal in a grand castle. It's a beach. It's survival. That's the power of this stage. It doesn't have to be obvious, but it does have to be definitive. Once you cross the line, you cannot go back. Next is stage 5, tests, allies, and enemies. Now that the hero is in this special world, they're out of their ordinary world, they immediately face tests, confront enemies, and identify allies. This stage is all about learning the rules of the new world. It's training ground. The hero gains skills, builds relationships, and begins to understand the stakes. Tests, allies, and enemies form one of the most dynamic parts of any story because it's where the plot really starts to move. It's not about introspection or decisions anymore. It's about action. Action, action, action. Each scene becomes a test, a challenge, or an encounter with a new face. Every interaction either helps or hinders the hero. In Christopher Vogler's analysis, this stage mirrors the training montage we see in sports movies like Rocky or The Karate Kid. But it's not always so obvious and not always a montage. Take The Drawing of the Three again. Roland doesn't meet a trainer, but he does meet Eddie Dean, one of my favorite characters of all time, a key ally. Their first encounter is Rocky. Eddie doesn't trust Roland, and Roland sees Eddie as a liability. But over time, Eddie becomes an absolutely essential ally. This is how Vogler explains it. Not every ally is obvious at first. They often start as reluctant or unwilling companions. They might be shapeshifters. This stage also introduces enemies. Roland's, for example, his biggest enemy in these chapters isn't a villain, it's his own body. His infection from the monster's bite is slowly killing him. And that's something he can't shoot or outwit. It's a clever use of this stage, where the enemy isn't always a person. It might be time, doubt, or something internal. In other stories like Star Wars, this stage plays out more classically. Luke finds allies, Han, Leia, Chewbacca, and faces enemies, stormtroopers, TIE fighters. The enemy here is more literal, and the training, learning to use the Force, is more obvious. But it still works, it's still great. This stage is where the world introduces conflict, and every character the hero meets has a purpose. They will either test them, train them, or betray them. Stage 6, enemies at every turn. By now, the hero is deep in the special world. The tone shifts from expectation to confrontation. The hero faces enemies, challenges, and moments of doubt. If you think of the hero's journey like a video game, this is where the level bosses start appearing. But it's also where the rules of the world become clear. Sometimes this stage is about learning the cost of failure. In Stephen King's The Drawing of the Three, Roland's infection grows worse. He's hallucinating, and his sense of control is slipping. This internal threat mirrors the external threats he faces. He's literally falling apart, and the question becomes, how much more can he endure? Enemies come in all forms. In King's story, it's the physical world, hunger, disease, and hallucinations. In the Hunger Games, it's literal enemies like Cato and the Careers. In The Lion King, it's Scar's henchmen, the hyenas. The hero faces threats from every angle, and their survival is no longer guaranteed. This stage is crucial because it introduces an idea that will continue through the rest of the hero's journey. Escalation. This is really important. The world doesn't just stay hard, it gets harder. In the Hunger Games, the stakes rise with every kill. In Roland's story, the pain increases with every mile. The audience needs to feel this escalating tension. The pressure on the hero should be felt by the audience, and each new challenge must be more intense than the last. This is a big issue with writers and things that I've read that I've seen, right? If the hero passes a test and the tension is maximum early on, and subsequent tests, the stakes are lower and the tension is less dramatic, the story gets boring. The story has to increase tension as each subsequent test is portrayed. If you skip any of these three stages, you're going to lose that momentum that we spoke about earlier on in the module. Imagine if Luke went from learning the Force straight to blowing up the Death Star. It just wouldn't work, right? That's not the story we know and love. We need to see the hero struggle, to suffer and learn. These stages make the hero feel human. Crossing the threshold tells us there's no turning back. Tests, allies, and enemies tells us the hero must grow. Enemies at every turn gives us the stakes. If they fail, they die. This is why these stages are so critical. Without them, the story feels too easy. The tests, the mentors, the betrayals, these are what makes the hero's journey feel real. It's the part of the story when the world hits back. So how can you use all of this in your own story? Think about your own hero. Are they still safe in their journey, or have they crossed the threshold? If they haven't faced real enemies, the story might be too easy. So you got to start looking for those opportunities to introduce conflict. Make the threats personal. Introduce an ally who was initially untrustworthy. Push your characters into situations where they have to learn new skills, rely on others, or face serious internal fears. Here's a quick self-check. Have they crossed a threshold? Have they faced something they can't undo? Have they faced a test, an ally, or an enemy? Have they met someone who challenged them, helped them, betrayed them? Have the stakes risen? Have you made things more difficult with enemies or challenges that escalate the pressure? Without these stages, you're going to lose tension. And without tension, you lose attention. This is where your story begins to accelerate. And if done well, this is the part that makes readers, viewers, or players say, I can't put this down. In the next module, we're going to look at stages 7 to 9, the cave, the ordeal, and the reward. This is where everything the hero has learned is put to the test. The ordeal is often called the heart of the story, and it's where the audience leans in closest. See you there.
Go behind the scenes at one of New York's fastest growing digital advertising agencies. Learn the tactics that we deploy for our clients every single day. You're going to be able to take that information, the best practices, the testing frameworks, and apply them today in your own campaigns and see extraordinary results. Join the Adventure Academy and learn digital advertising from the #1 and #3 most influential PPC experts in the world. They don't teach this stuff in advertising school.